Hi all, welcome back to my series on my great-great-grandfather's memoir of the American Civil War. Housekeeping, I'm smoking a Peterson, kind of a copper army mount. This is a 107, kind of the big brother of the 106. I've got a matching copper Bic sleeve with my initial, and one of my favorite tampers. This is an ebony tamper made by Temper Tantrum. So, anyways, let's get into it. Chapter 7, I believe. My regiment, the 4th Wisconsin Cavalry, was in service 2 years before I joined the regiment, with others to fill vacant ranks. They had already gone through and saw hard service. They were camped at Baltimore at the Raleigh House, doing great work guarding the railroads. That was 1861 and 1862. They were at Vicksburg and then went to Port Hudson, where the company was almost annihilated, and the colonel of the regiment, Albert E. Payne, lost his leg. Then from there they went to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and took part in the battle, fought at that place, and from there to New Orleans, and from there to Ship Islands, and then back to Baton Rouge. All this work was done before our recruits joined the regiment. They were a noble lot of men, and we served together for nearly 3 years. Then these old boys enlisted for 3 years or during the war. They were given a furlough to go home, and the younger boys took their place while they were gone. They had a fine time at home, and I can tell you we were glad when they came back. They told us all the news and about all the good times they had, and some were shining around our girls while we left behind. So by the time they got back, we were pretty well hardened and equal to all occasions. So I wanted to give the greatest part of the praises to the soldiers of 61, those who veteranized and served the full 5 years. At the beginning of the war, some of the rankest of the rebels used to try to scare us by telling us they would kill us all off with yellow fever. And not to be outdone, we told them we had with us the smallpox and cholera. We lost quite a number with the smallpox. My partner, Nathaniel Windsor, while tenting with me, was taken down with smallpox, and he was taken several miles from the camp and placed in a slaughterhouse alongside the Mississippi River. After he had laid there 6 weeks with only an attendant, an old colored man who had had the smallpox, he had an awful hard and lonesome time, but he pulled through all right and was taken to some hospital where he was cleared up and given medical attention. He was then fitted out with a full suit of Uncle Sam's uniform, and he came back to the regiment and to our company. He was very much run down, only weighing 80 pounds. He was so weak that the wind would blow him around. He came to my tent and we bunked together, and after that there was none of our company that had the smallpox. In 1864, on a scout with Lieutenant Bush in command of Company C, we went out about 30 miles on the clay-cut road, leading out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We ran into an ambush. There were about 20 rebels. They fired on us and cut our squad in two. Our Lieutenant Bush received 5 buckshots, and then was a long fight before they fell back and had their horses. They had their horses tied about a half-mile back from where they laid in ambush. Lieutenant Bush was so badly wounded that he was never able to do any more duty as a soldier and was sent home. We lost 1 or 2 men and had many of the rebels, and how many of the rebels we killed we never knew, as the brush was so thick that we could not see them after the firing was over. We had 1 man in our company by the name of Christ Schumann, who got a mini ball of shot in his thigh. He was one of the men who got away. He had to cross through the woods to another road and came into camp almost helpless in his saddle. His faithful horse brought him into camp with blood running over the saddle and down the horse's leg. He was a horrible-looking sight. He was taken to the hospital of Baton Rouge, and the boys did all they could to nourish him with chicken soup, which they got on different scouts. But the poor fellow died in 2 weeks when the lockjaw set in. Away back in 63 and 64, the rebels had a good scout man. He went by the name of Notorious Brown and ranked as a lieutenant in the rebel army. He gave us all kinds of trouble as he was an expert horseman, and for that reason he had a little advantage over us. We had several small engagements with his company of men on our scouting parties. He was a noble fellow because he always played fair. He had taken many of our men prisoner, and we had taken some of his company. He drove us away a good many times from a good meal, and we did the same to him. We laid all kinds of plans to capture this Notorious Brown. One time we caught him napping and took him prisoner together with some of his men. So we had him fall in with his men, and being such a good scout, who had the respect of all our scouts, the lieutenant in command of our squad gave him permission to ride his own horse, which was a thoroughbred Kentucky saddle horse. We were riding along, the night was beautiful, and we were telling stories as though we were good friends. Lieutenant Brown was placed in the middle of our squad, and he rode on the outside. We were riding in fours, and I was in the third four in the rear of Lieutenant Brown, when all at once I heard the word of "Good night." He, knowing the trail and his horse posted, he took his chance and went into the woods. Our boys shot at him several times, but he rode off and gave us a laugh and a rebel yell, and it made our boys look pretty cheap. The officer in command wanted to know where Lieutenant Brown was and how he got away, and the boys said, "Fleed." He fled. So our scouting wasn't one-sided, as the Johnnies were always on the watch and were a daring lot, and took lots of chances on their side, sometimes outnumbered. Anyways, that was chapter 7. On to chapter 8. The part that women and girls took in the Great Civil War. Not being old enough in 1861, I had to wait until 1863, then had to stretch 1 year to get into the service. He fibbed about his age. During that time, my father and mother were living at the Quincy mine, and being a young boy, 15 years of age, had a good chance to find out what women and girls were doing. The first 2 or 3 years of the Civil War, why the why the women and girls would make more volunteers than a half a dozen brass bands. A boy that was old enough to go to the front and failed to do so would be scorned by the ladies. Oh, the beautiful farewell parties the ladies would get up for the boys that were going to the front, and the beautiful patriotic songs such as "The time has come when brothers must fight, and sisters must pray at home, and we are coming, Father Abraham, 300,000 more, and farewell, mother, you may never press me to your heart again. And Johnny Brown's body lies a molding in the ground, and we'll hang Jeff Davis on the sour apple tree." The Sheboygan Falls girls were all pretty looking girls, and they dressed with hoops according to their height, and they all formed in a row and made a nice show, and the line would reach to the other side of Sheboygan. I, being alone in Sheboygan Falls, when leaving for the front, and all the rest of the boys' mothers were there to bid them farewell, one lady noticed me alone and said, "Billy, you have no mother here to bid you goodbye? I will take the place of your mother," and she kissed me goodbye. The home surroundings in Sheboygan Falls were very good for young boys. They had 2 temperance lodges. One met Monday nights and the other on Saturday nights, and all could join from 14 to older people. And we all had to take a solemn pledge that we would not handle or touch any strong drink, or be seen in any bad company. And I can tell you, we all had good times, and could hardly wait for the meeting time to come. At the meetings, the older people would have the first hour or so for speaking and reading papers, and then at intermission of a half an hour, all the old and young mixed together. The boys and the girls had their good times, passing conversation, candies, and the remainder of the time was taken organizing new members. I had often thought of the picnics held each year in a fine grove 10 miles from Sheboygan Falls, where long tables were set up, each party bringing a basket, and those who did not have a basket sat at the tables just the same. Those things were impressed on my memory so strong, I never had any desire to indulge in anything else. These days we never heard of moonshine or bootleggers or cigaretters. There were more temperance preached those days and less laws. One more thing was a boiling cold water springs near the old lime kiln, where I had many a cool drink, and I used to dream of that spring while in the army. I have seen women plowing, sowing, planting, harvesting, in fact, everything being done on the farm that was done by the men before they went to the front, as the women surely had to keep the home fires burning while the men fought the battles at the front. Mostly all of the soldiers were leaving for the front. Mostly all of the soldiers that were leaving for the front was presented by some lady with a little housewife, made of Morocco leather, and the housewife was filled with pins, needles, and buttons. There was no Red Cross or Salvation armies. We did not need any warm socks as we were going to a warmer climate. There were very few nurses, only one from Sheboygan, a Miss Helen Cole, and not more than 10 nurses in all, and they must have been in the convalescent hospital. I never saw one on the front where I was there, when I was there, where I was there, as there were men called hospital stewards and ranked as non-commissioned officers. The Southern women were a little better off in some respects as they had their slaves to fall back on, but they had their troubles, as every man and boy from 10 years to 75 years, or in other words, from cradle to grave, was in the Confederate Army. They had their slaves pretty well trained so that they would not run away, and they used to tell them that the Yankees had horns and would kill them. I had ridden to several plantations, coming upon a bunch of young Negroes suddenly, and found them crawling on their hands and knees, trying to hide from us like scared cats. They would try to find out, we would try to find out the trouble. When one of the Negro girls spoke up, "Ain't you all got horns?" And they looked surprised when they saw us, and we laughed, as we had heard that story before. We find that we can't get along without the women. So that's the end of chapter 8. So a little mention of the part that women took in the war and their plight, their situation. So anyways, 2 more chapters down. I hope you guys are still enjoying it. I know I am. And yeah, it looks like we're past the halfway mark. So I'll keep plugging away. Thanks, guys. Take care. God bless. And I'll talk to you again soon.